I had these covers of Narnia. Those were the exact covers that I had. That was the very first set of Narnia books that I read. Was this cover right here. Um, I read the shit out of those books. This was the first series that I ever read when I was 5 years old, and then um, I read The Hobbit just before this, and then I read the Narnia books, and didn't read the Lord of the Rings until like 2 years later. But I read The Hobbit, and then I read these, and this was something that took me like 2 years, something like that probably. But I reread these a bunch. They're all, I think my parents probably still have them in a box somewhere, like all taped up, probably. Um, Silver Chair was by far my favorite book when I was reading those as a kid. I think the whole, essentially, Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader are essentially can be read, as one book because they both involve Caspian. Um, the rest of them are all kind of standalone. The Horse and His Boy is a really good novel too, though, but it was different because it took place in a completely different land and ended up back in Narnia. But it was still like a fun Arabian Nights type story. But Just His Nephew was always the hardest to read because that was like his origin story, and it was much darker than the rest of it. And I just never really enjoyed The Last Battle that much. The Last Battle was way too. I mean, obviously C.S. Lewis was a religious fellow, but the last book is very heavy on the nose with some of the religious plot points. The rest of it is allegorical in nature, but it's not like hitting you over the head with it. Whereas the last book is very much hitting you on the head with the Christianity aspect. And it's, if you're not a believer, that can be a struggle to get past if you're reading the books. But it's the same thing with his space trilogy. The first book in particular is more of a regular sci-fi novel. The second one is very much like he was playing around with his origin story and creating something similar to what Tolkien had with his Silmarillion. And there's a lot of shared themes there with the Valar and the, I forget what the name of the angel characters in C.S. Lewis's space trilogy are called, but there's some really interesting stuff there where he's dealing with Perlander, which is, I think it was Venus or Mars, I forget which one it was, um, as being like this second Eden, and so he's there, Random's there, dealing with the Eve and the serpent and seduction and all this other crazy stuff. And then when you get to that hideous strength, it's supposed to be like the end times. And I mean, they're great books, but you know. But I also remember when I was a kid because I grew up in that upbringing. The Screw Tape Letters was a lot of fun to read. And even going back now as a non-believer and reading the Screw Tape Letters, it's a lot of fun because it's the concept of demons talking, and there's some fun stuff in there, man. C.S. Lewis, very, very imaginative, creative person. I love the Narnia books. I can't wait to watch the Narnia show that's coming out on Netflix. I really enjoyed. So I started watching. I watched the BBC version back in like the '80s. My mom bought them on VHS. Um, Tom, what's his name? He was one of the Doctor Who guys. One of the early Doctor Who's played Puddleglum, who's from The Silver Chair, which is my favorite novel. But it was a very low quality, bad, like hand puppets and stuff version, and I think they only did 4 movies. They did the first 4 books. I watched those originally. What's up, Babylonia? Good morning. And then, of course, watched the films that came out like 15, 20 years ago. Loved the films. And then Netflix is producing, I think it's Netflix or Amazon. Somebody's producing a series, and I think it's coming out next year. And I will watch the shit out of it.